The ordinary day that turned into chaos. The day itself couldn't have started more unremarkably. It was a Tuesday that blended into every other Tuesday. Emails, weak coffee, and the kind of half-dead shuffle through tasks that doesn't deserve more than a passing memory. By mid-morning, a headache had settled in. Nothing spectacular, just enough to make staring at my screen unbearable. I told myself I'd push through, but by noon, it felt like my skull was its own drumline. That's when I made the call to head home early. A nap seemed like the best medicine. On paper, going home sounded responsible. Take care of yourself, avoid burning out. In reality, it became the most disastrous decision I've ever made. I left work with nothing more on my mind than silence and darkness behind closed blinds. I had no hint that walking out a couple hours early was going to redirect my entire life. The drive back was short and uneventful. My girlfriend and I had been together for 3 years, and we shared a small 2-bedroom apartment just a few minutes from my office. Pulling into the lot, I pictured dropping my bag by the door and heading straight to nap territory. I didn't walk in expecting anything other than quiet. If anything felt unusual, it was only that I was relieved to get off the road and finally rest. I slid the key into the lock, went through the motions, bag down, shoes off, trying not to think about my headache. The place felt still, but I brushed it off, chalking it up to her maybe having headphones on or already taking a nap. Nothing in that silence screamed warning. It just felt like a normal afternoon waiting to start. That's what makes the moment so sharp in my memory. Because the second I pushed open our bedroom door, normal disappeared. Instead of calm, I walked straight into the kind of scene you only believe happens to someone else. There was my girlfriend, the person I'd built 3 years of my life with, and a 19-year-old college kid in our bed. Not sitting, not pretending, mid-action, tangled up on sheets that yesterday had been ours. Everything froze. Them. Me. The air in the room. My girlfriend scrambled away, like being caught, made it vanish, and the kid just stayed there, half-dressed, staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. For half a second, my brain didn't process it. I stood there locked in place, the shock hitting so hard it erased the pounding in my head. Turns out, the headache was the smallest problem of my day. My body reacted before my mind did. Adrenaline surged up, sharp enough that I could feel my hands tremble. My chest tightened, heart charging forward like it wanted out. It was disbelief and anger smashing into each other at the same time, so intense that I couldn't decide which one got control first. The sight cracked to open something I didn't know I had in me. 1 second I was frozen, the next I felt like I was about to explode. That instant, that image is the marker between my old life and the mess that followed. One moment, I was a guy complaining about a headache. The next, I was standing in my own doorway, blindsided, watching everything I trusted fall apart in front of me. And before I could even process what came next, the scene itself shifted into something I wasn't prepared for at all. Walking into the wrong movie scene. Walking into that room felt like stepping onto a stage I didn't know existed. 1 second I was turning a doorknob, ready to collapse on my bed, and the next I was staring down a scene I wasn't supposed to see. She was tangled up in the sheets with someone who didn't look old enough to rent a car. 19. A college kid. My girlfriend of 3 years, 26 years old, with someone barely out of high school textbooks. The whole thing stopped cold the instant I appeared. I didn't move. They didn't move. She scrambled off him, clumsy and frantic, as if covering herself would erase everything I just walked in on. The kid froze on my bed, half-dressed, wide-eyed, looking like he'd just been caught shoplifting for the first time. That detail hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just about betrayal. It was about the absurdity. My home had turned into the world's most humiliating stage play, and I was cast as the accidental audience. For a beat, nothing registered. I could see the mess, the shoes kicked to the corner, clothes knotted on the floor, sheets twisted out of place, but my brain refused to arrange the picture into something real. It was as if the frame of my life cracked in half. The reality I thought I lived in didn't line up with what I was seeing. I wasn't crying. I wasn't yelling. I was blank, like the signal had cut out and left me staring at static. And yes, that numbness didn't last. Heat burned beneath the surface of my skin. Confusion dug its claws into anger, and I could feel control slipping before I'd even opened my mouth. I wasn't standing in disbelief anymore. I was building towards something that couldn't be contained. The silence of that room pressed in from every direction. Nobody said a word. She half raised her hand, maybe to explain, maybe to apologize, but nothing came out yet. The kid didn't even try to get up. He sat there, pale, half naked, as if staying still might erase him from the scene altogether. My own chest felt tight, air grinding in and out, while my head screamed at me to react. The strangeness of it all cut even deeper. This was our bedroom, our bed, our space. 3 years of shared life, torn apart in a single image. Seeing her tangled with him peeled away every piece of trust I thought I had. Suddenly, it wasn't mine anymore. It was just a stage for something ugly, and I had been shoved into the spotlight without warning. Shock still hung in the air, but underneath it, anger was moving in quickly, shouldering everything else aside. It burned hot and sharp, a split-second surge that left no room for patience. My fists felt heavy, my breath uneven. I wasn't calm. I wasn't about to weigh my options. I was a man staring at catastrophe, teetering on the edge of doing something I couldn't take back. And that edge, it came fast. Faster than I thought possible. Because in that silent, frozen room, it was only a matter of time before the stillness shattered. When it did, my reaction wasn't measured, and it sure wasn't the kind you describe as rational. The excuses that deserve awards. The first sound to break through the stillness wasn't mine. It was hers. My girlfriend, jolted into a frenzy of words, panicked lines spilling out in every direction. And the very first thing she threw at me, with clothes half on and guilt written across her face, was, "It doesn't mean anything." Hearing that in my own bedroom made my skin crawl. The sheer absurdity of it snapped something inside me. Here I was staring at a 19-year-old kid tangled in the sheets we slept on, and her defense was to act like what I just witnessed was a casual accident. It wasn't a misstep you could brush off like knocking over a coffee cup. It was a betrayal so obvious it scorched itself into my memory forever. She kept talking, piling more words on top of that insult. "You're misunderstanding. This isn't important. I still love you." Each line rolled out like she believed stacking explanations would somehow outweigh the evidence in front of me. But nothing she said did anything except magnify how wrong it all was. Panic makes people talk too much, and she was filling the silence with excuses that sprayed humiliation onto the wound. The kid even tried to speak. His voice barely made it out, shaky and cracked, muttering how he didn't know she had a boyfriend. Like that helped. He looked less like an accomplice and more like some freshman caught sneaking past curfew. But she cut him off, talking over him, desperate to steer the spotlight back toward me, as if controlling the words would control the story. That first excuse, though it doesn't mean anything, is what rooted itself in my head. Because the more I turned it over, the worse it got. What she meant is damage control burned hotter than silence ever could. Saying it didn't mean anything didn't shrink the betrayal. It stretched it wider. If it really was meaningless, if there was no weight behind it, then why sacrifice everything we built for something disposable? That reasoning only stripped away the last shred of respect in the wreckage. One line is all it took. It was like someone driving your car into a wall, then smiling and saying, "Relax, it didn't mean anything." You're still standing in front of a crushed engine, and your life doesn't magically go back to normal because they framed it like it barely mattered. In that moment, that single excuse carried more venom than silence ever could have. She stood there with her hands half raised, her voice sharp and shaky, circling the words as if repeating them would somehow resuscitate things. But I wasn't nodding, I wasn't softening, and I definitely wasn't convinced. Every time she spoke, it felt like an attempt not just to excuse what she'd done, but to rewrite my reaction before I even had one. That turned disbelief into rage, because the moment she tried to minimize it, she wasn't only cheating, she was also making me out to be unreasonable for not accepting her version. What gnaws at me now is how those lines later turned into something even sharper. In the aftermath, when neighbors and police showed up, she reshaped the story. Suddenly, I wasn't the cheated on boyfriend standing in shock. I was the violent one, the monster she needed to defend herself against. The irony of that shift still grates. In that room, she was the one scrambling, swearing it didn't mean anything, eyes wide, words frantic. Hours later, the same person was painting herself terrified, as though I was the danger from the very beginning. That was the start of how the narrative flipped entirely out of my hands. But in the doorway, before all of that unraveling, I was locked onto her excuses. Every word she chose stripped away accountability and shoved salt deeper into the wound. She wasn't just betraying me, she was discrediting me, demanding I accept what I'd seen as smaller than it was. That desperation to smooth over the wreckage only made the flames burn hotter. The boy sat frozen through it all, looking for an opening to escape, while she kept talking herself deeper. It was chaos disguised as conversation, and my own body was betraying me, hands tight, chest constricted, heat rising fast. She thought she was putting out a fire. To me, she was spilling gasoline and refusing to see the sparks. And her noise wasn't easing me back. It was speeding me forward, dragging me past disbelief and into something I couldn't step out of once I crossed it. Each repetition of "it doesn't mean anything" hit like a shove, pushing me further from reason and closer to eruption. That final echo of her voice still reverberated in my head. By the time it landed one last time, there was no space left for shock. Just a tide rising higher than I could control, one that had nowhere to go but outward. And in that charged silence that followed her excuses, I could feel the next part beginning, the moment where something inside me tipped, and everything that had been bottled up was about to break loose. Rage mode unlocked. Rage mode doesn't come with warning lights. It just flips on. 1 second I was still hearing her excuses echo in my head, and the next, my chest was pounding, fists clenched, teeth grinding like they had a mind of their own. A wall of heat swallowed up the shock I'd been frozen in. My body took control before my brain had time to argue. That's the scariest part. Rage is fast. Like I'd suddenly body snatched the Hulk, except this wasn't some epic showdown in an arena. It was just me, a college kid who shouldn't have been there, and the ruins of my relationship all piled on one flimsy mattress. Fury that big inside four walls doesn't look heroic. It looks sloppy, loud, and terrifying. And here's the kicker. It wasn't destiny, fate, or some unstoppable instinct. It was me making choices, ugly ones, in a state where reason had packed up and left the room. The shift came quickly. I moved forward before I even thought go. The kid didn't fight. He didn't run. He just froze, wide-eyed, like a deer staring down headlights he couldn't dodge. And somehow, that made it worse. Seeing him there, half naked in my bed, perfectly still, was like pouring gasoline straight onto the fury I already felt sparking inside me. My rational brain was unplugged and pure rage surged into the open space. The first hit landed before I even processed what I was doing. My fist connected, and he toppled sideways, scrambling for balance, but not moving fast enough. My girlfriend screamed, reaching out to grab me, and I shoved her aside without thought or aim, locked on only to him. He tried again to push himself upright, but I was already on him, closing the gap in seconds. I swung again and again until his arms stopped coming up to shield himself. Every blow blurred together. My knuckles split, my breathing turned ragged. His body sagged under the weight of the strikes. The anger didn't drain with the hits. It surged higher, feeding itself like it was on an endless loop. I wasn't landing punches on a person anymore. I was unloading on months, maybe years, of trust that had just crumbled in front of me. Each strike was a desperate attempt to put that betrayal back out of existence, to force it out of my home. And then his body stopped fighting back. He collapsed onto the carpet, curling in on himself, no strength left to do anything else. But I didn't stop. I kept pushing, fists striving until he went limp and his head bounced against the floor with a sound I still can't get out of my ears. That moment finally broke the red haze enough for me to realize what had just happened. The kid wasn't just hurt, he was barely conscious. Blood smeared across the sheets and the floor, running from the side of his face where my fists had landed most. Later, I learned the full cost: a concussion, stitches, bruises that would last for weeks. In those seconds, his injuries were written in how twisted his body looked underneath mine and the way his chest moved shallow and slow. I stood over him with my hands trembling, knuckles bleeding, breath shaking my whole body. My girlfriend's voice cut through, but I couldn't process the words. She was crying, panicked, somewhere between trying to pull me back and trying to comfort him. Both of us were staring down at the ugly aftermath of what I'd just done. And the truth hit harder than a punch had. I had crossed a line I could never step back from. In that living room, just moments before, all the sympathy had been mine. I was the betrayed partner blindsided by a girlfriend's lies. But with fists flying, the script rewrote itself. In an instant, I wasn't the victim anymore. I looked like the monster. She was sobbing, he was sprawled out bleeding, and I stood above them both, furious and shaking. Rage had stolen whatever high ground I had and thrown it out the window. Here's the legal reality I didn't think about until much later. Betrayal, humiliation, heartbreak. None of it justifies violence in the eyes of the law. No matter how raw the provocation, you don't have a free pass to beat someone unconscious. And that's exactly what I had done. In that split second where control broke, I handed the law an airtight case: aggravated assault. They wouldn't see the betrayal, the lies, the excuses echoing in my ears. They'd see bruises, stitches, and hospital records. And those don't lie. It's strange, looking back, how a metaphor that felt funny, me as the Hulk flinging punches, turns painfully literal in hindsight. Because unlike in comic books, Hulk doesn't calm down and reset the scene. He leaves a trail of destruction he can't sweep away. That was me. No clever one-liners, no redemption arc. Just a guy who let fury do the talking, and in doing so, rewrote himself from the wronged boyfriend into the criminal aggressor. I can imagine 100 other choices. Walking away, yelling, grabbing a bag and leaving. Even just standing still until the heat drained out. Any outcome would have been less final than the one I picked. But I didn't pull myself back. I let it run me, and then I stood shaking in the wreckage, staring down at a college kid's unconscious body and realizing I wasn't defending my dignity at all. I was destroying it. The scariest part is how fast it all happened. Rage doesn't measure itself in hours. It takes seconds, maybe less, to detonate everything. What started as heartbreak ended with me glaring down at blood on my own carpet, while my girlfriend cried in the corner of the room, already shifting the story in real time to cast me as the monster. And honestly, she didn't have to twist much. The scene already handed her all the evidence. When you're in it, rage feels like release. But once it fades, you're left with silence and the sound of your own ragged breath, and the room looks like a battlefield where you're the only one standing. It doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't make grief smaller. It just makes the wound bigger and drags you down into a place that betrays yourself as much as anyone else. And the worst part? That explosion didn't stay contained within the walls of that apartment. The neighbors get a free show. Sound carries easily in buildings like mine, and